She appeared like a shadow, and everything changed. I didn't know that behind her beautiful smile lay destruction. But something deep inside me told me she wouldn't leave until she got what she needed. And I was ready to fight, even though I didn't fully understand what I would lose in the end. My name is Chloe, and a year ago, I married the love of my life, Jack. Our relationship was everything I had ever dreamed of. It was loving, supportive, and filled with laughter. I couldn't have been happier in my family life. It was the kind of harmony that people often dream of, but which few are fortunate enough to experience. Every morning, waking up next to Jack, I felt the world become soft, warm, and cozy. His smile was everything I had always been searching for. I was certain that our love would last forever. I worked as an accountant, mostly from home. It was a job I enjoyed. Not that I had ever dreamed of a career that required constant business trips or meetings with people, no. I appreciated the peace. Sitting in silence, processing numbers, reviewing reports, and perhaps treating myself to a small break with a cup of coffee once a week, gazing at the horizon from the window. There was more to my professional life than just meetings with Jack, of course, but he was always my center, the one for whom I would do anything. Jack had his own business selling car parts, which kept him busy. He often left for hours, sometimes entire days, especially when big deals were on the horizon. But this never interfered with our time together. Jack was drawn to the idea of working for himself, and he was the kind of person who could work at his own pace and on his own terms. It gave him freedom and me more time with him, which I cherished. In the evenings, we often went out to see friends. We had a lot of acquaintances, a large circle of friends, colleagues, and Jack's business partners. I always looked forward to these gatherings, enjoying the chance to socialize and be part of his world. We loved spending time with them, sometimes simply listening to the stories they told or laughing at something utterly silly, but those moments were precious. Our friends were diverse, but they all shared one important trait: a genuine affection for one another. Jack and I eventually realized that our circles had intertwined, and I felt at home among their lively conversations, carefree laughter, and evening walks around the city. One sunny Saturday morning, I was sitting at our kitchen table, sipping coffee and checking my email. A perfect, carefree moment when the world seems uncomplicated, and all you need to do is be here and now. I was flipping through emails, responding to a few work queries, and accidentally opened an old correspondence with one of our clients. My thoughts suddenly drifted away. I lost track of time, though, in that moment, time didn't matter. And then I heard the sound of the door opening. Jack walked into the kitchen, smiling from ear to ear. He was wearing his t-shirt and jeans, his face slightly flushed from his morning walk. He always smiled like that, as if the whole world were his favorite place. Instantly, his energy filled the room. I felt my heart beat a little faster. "Hey, beautiful," he said, walking over to me and kissing the top of my head, just as he always did when he came home. His scent was fresh, light, with hints of morning air. I hugged him, feeling his strong, confident arms wrap around me. He was my world, and I was his. "How was the morning round?" I asked, putting my laptop aside and tilting my head to look into his eyes. Jack sat down next to me, his expression becoming a little more serious. "Not bad, but we've got issues with one of the suppliers. I'll have to meet with him next week." He said this calmly, as he always did, but I knew that these issues meant more to him than just routine business. He always worried when something went wrong, especially when it involved his business. I didn't know all the details, but I trusted him completely. "You're stressing out," I said, placing his hand against my face. "You'll manage, like always." Jack smiled, but there was a shadow in his eyes. It wasn't the usual concern he showed. "I hope so. It's just, sometimes everything gets too overwhelming." I noticed his gaze drifting a little, his shoulders sagging slightly, as if the weight of the day was finally pressing down on him. I sat down next to him and took his hand in mine. "You can be strong and successful, Jack, but remember, you also need time to rest. We're in this together, remember?" I said with a soft smile, hoping to ease him a little. He looked at me, and a slight smile returned to his face. It was the same smile that told me everything would be okay. But I noticed something else in his eyes, something I couldn't quite understand. In the weeks following that first meeting with Vanessa, I began to notice her showing up more frequently at our social gatherings. Every time she entered a room, something in the air shifted. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but something made me feel uncomfortable, as if I didn't belong. Her presence, bright, aggressive, slightly irritating, was always just a little more than I would have liked. It was as if she didn't just walk into the room but somehow claimed all the space, causing everyone else to quiet down and adjust to her manner of communication. One evening, on a Friday, at a dinner party hosted by one of Jack's business partners, my encounter with Vanessa became especially vivid. A few of us wives were chatting by the drink station when she, as if in no hurry, approached us with a glass of champagne in her hand. There was no trace of urgency in her movements, yet each step seemed to envelop the space with coldness and silent menace. She moved as though she knew every eye in the room would be on her, and she clearly reveled in it. "Oh, Chloe," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet but laced with the usual mocking tone. "What an interesting outfit." I didn't realize the librarian look was back in fashion. I involuntarily glanced at my clothes, a knee-length skirt and a neat blouse. Suddenly, I felt a tightening inside me, and it was anything but pleasant. She looked at me as if I had just stepped out in worn slippers and a forgotten scarf tied around my neck. The tone of her words wasn't merely critical, it was scornful, biting, as if she were trying to make me feel absurd, out of place. I looked at my skirt, my shoes, and tried to understand what in my outfit could have displeased her. Everything seemed neat and moderate. Why, then, did I suddenly feel so uncomfortable? "I think it's appropriate for a dinner party," I replied, trying to stay calm and not let her jabs get to me. Of course, I knew that in her world, Vanessa's world, everything had to be impeccable, expensive, and devoid of any trace of everyday life. But I wasn't about to justify myself. I was there to enjoy the evening with friends, not to be the target of her ridicule. Vanessa laughed, and the sound was like the clinking of glass, cold and brittle. It wasn't the kind of laugh that could make you smile. Rather, it made you uneasy, as if something had broken or cracked somewhere in your world. "Of course, she began, and I could feel her voice becoming even more venomous. "You probably haven't even noticed that you're still wearing that look." I tried to keep my composure, but something in her words made me feel small and insignificant. She didn't even try to hide her disdain. It was like an open attack. And in that moment, I realized her game wasn't about making me part of the group, it was about putting me in my place, as an outsider among those who knew what true style was. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean," I replied, trying to suppress the anxiety that was beginning to bubble up. Inside, something stirred, a small spark of anger that, with each of her phrases, grew stronger. Vanessa looked at me with a triumphant smile, as if she had finally caught me in a weakness. I knew I couldn't let her win this game. But at the same time, I understood that her attacks were part of something bigger, not just a random misunderstanding or a coincidence. She was part of Jack's world, and her presence among us, among his friends and business partners, was something integral. But wasn't there something strange in her behavior? Her words weren't just expressions of dissatisfaction, they were intrusive, deliberately painful, as if she had something to prove, as if she needed to show everyone around her who she really was. I pulled away from him, feeling a growing sense of disappointment inside me. There was no strength in his words, no reassurance that I had always felt in our interactions. And what about our relationship? Those words, spoken in my mind, echoed louder than anything Jack could say. "It doesn't really matter," he said, looking into my eyes with pain, as if hoping his words would comfort me. You know you're the only one I love. This is in the past. I chose you. His words were meant to be soothing, but instead, they only amplified my inner discomfort. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our problems. As I went to bed that night, I couldn't help but think that our perfect life was beginning to crumble because of some inexplicable step, a betrayal that didn't fit into my worldview. Deceit. Yes, perhaps that's what it was. Or maybe it was something more complicated than I could imagine. Every little detail, every moment of doubt I tried to chase away like an annoying fly, came back to me again and again. As the weeks went by, Vanessa's behavior grew more brazen. At every party or gathering, it seemed like she made it her goal to get under my skin, to somehow insert herself into my world, into what was mine and only mine. She started fitting into our circle of friends more firmly, genuinely, or perhaps skillfully drawing attention. No matter how much I resisted, I understood that every step she took seemed to touch my most vulnerable spots. Jack, still wrapped up in his work, sometimes didn't notice how Vanessa, like a ghost, was consuming all the space that had once been ours alone. One particularly memorable evening, at a cocktail party hosted by one of Jack's colleagues, I felt it was becoming unbearable. I had chosen a simple yet elegant black dress for the occasion, feeling confident and comfortable. I thought that on this evening, I could forget everything, simply enjoy the evening, the conversations, and finally allow myself to be who I was before all of this. But the moment I entered the room, there was Vanessa, as always, right in the center of attention. She stood next to Jack, speaking to him too closely, too animatedly. With her long nails and slightly haughty smile, it was as if she wasn't just his acquaintance but something much more. I felt her presence begin to weigh on me. I walked over to the bar and grabbed a glass of wine, trying not to look in their direction, but eventually, her gaze fell on me. There was something in its shine that I couldn't understand. A subtle game, a cold superiority. She took a step toward me, and it was no accident. "Chloe," she said, with a faint hint of mockery in her voice, "how are you feeling? Not too bored among all these business talks?" I noticed her eyes sparkle when she caught my returning glance. I didn't let myself show any weakness, although inside, everything was turning upside down. I felt a tightness in my chest, as if the air in the room had suddenly thickened and might swallow me whole. "I'm fine, Vanessa," I replied, trying to stay calm, but my voice betrayed me with a slight tremor. "I'm used to it." She smirked and leaned in closer, as though she suddenly decided it was time to claim my territory, this little corner of the world that had once been only mine. Jack seemed oblivious to the shift in our conversation. He was absorbed in other talks, but I could feel his attention slipping away from me, as if we had become strangers, disconnected. Vanessa had taken up all the space, and despite my efforts, I found myself once again in the shadows. Vanessa's eyes widened in feigned innocence, but in her gaze, I caught something more, a glimpse of her true intentions. She seemed to genuinely enjoy every moment, as though every word and every move had been meticulously planned down to the smallest detail. "Why, Jack," she said casually. "I'm just trying to help someone who needs to teach your little wife how to dress for these events." Before Jack could respond, I felt something cold and wet seep through the fabric of my dress. I looked down in shock and saw red wine spreading across the front of my outfit, leaving large stains that seemed to slowly, but surely, ruin not only my appearance but also my sense of dignity. Vanessa stood before me, holding an empty glass, her face displaying a weak, almost theatrical regret, but I knew her too well to believe it. "Oh no," she gasped, feigning clumsiness on my part, although, honestly, that stain would improve that dreadful outfit. The whole room seemed to go silent, and I could feel invisible eyes closing in on us. People in the hallway stopped talking, and the air grew thick with tension. All eyes were on us, on me, standing in the center with wine dripping from my clothes. I couldn't decide what I should feel, humiliation or fury. Perhaps it was a mix of both. I felt the heat and shame tighten my body into a fist. I stood there, frozen, feeling the turmoil building inside me. But then I looked at Vanessa. At her self-satisfied face, which made no attempt to hide her delight at my discomfort. And in that moment, something inside me snapped, like a string stretched to its breaking point, and then suddenly snapped with a sharp sound. "You know what, Vanessa?" I said, not taking a step back, my voice steady, almost cold as ice. "You've really shown me who you are." Her face shifted. She no longer looked so confident. Vanessa's eyebrows lifted slightly, and her lips parted for a moment, as if she hadn't expected such a reaction. But I didn't stop. I took a step closer to her, despite Jack's gaze, which clearly showed concern for the situation. My attention was focused solely on Vanessa. I could no longer hold back my feelings. "Do you really think I don't have the guts to face you?" I continued, my breath growing steadier, despite the storm inside. "Do you think I don't understand your game?" Vanessa bit her lip, clearly trying to collect her defenses. But I was no longer planning to stop. All those weeks, all the glances and words she had thrown at me from a distance had finally built up. In that moment, I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. This wasn't just an accident, it was intentional, and her playing with the boundaries of what was permissible couldn't go without consequences. I turned to Jack, whose face was an expression of some vague pain, but I couldn't think about him right now. At that moment, all I felt was directed at Vanessa. And I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure: I wouldn't let her humiliate me again. When the mention of El Chateau came up, I felt an involuntary smile tug at my lips. It was one of those places I had always dreamed of, an elegant restaurant where all the important people gathered, where every evening turned into a small work of art. I had never been there alone, but I knew it attracted Jack, and often we met there with his business partners and friends. Vanessa had mentioned several times how much she liked the restaurant, and in that moment, I felt something stir inside me. Maybe that was her goal, to throw me off balance once again. Everything she said seemed like part of a plan. "All right," I said, making an instant decision, not even trying to hide my resolve. "I'll be there." "What time?" "Wonderful," Vanessa exclaimed with a bright smile. 8 o'clock, don't be late." I nodded, feeling her words like a preordained prophecy that couldn't be ignored. My heart quickened. What was happening felt strange, but I couldn't and didn't want to back away from it. Suddenly, something inside me told me that now I had to be ready. That evening, I had to go, no matter what. Exactly at 8 o'clock, I walked into the Chateau, where Jack's lively group of friends was already sitting at a table. 8 people, including Vanessa, filled it. In the dark, mysterious light of the candles, I saw them laughing and talking. For a moment, I thought that maybe everything would be fine, that I could just enjoy the evening, ignoring the subtle jabs and hidden mockeries. But when I approached the table, my heart sank. There was no place prepared for me. I stood there, unsure of how to act, and felt every gaze suddenly turn toward me. Vanessa, sitting at the center, rose from her chair, her eyes flashing with malice. I saw how her gaze cut through the air sharply, and although she smiled, there was no warmth in it. She looked at me as if I were something foreign, unnecessary. "Oh, Chloe," she said loudly, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm afraid there's been a little misunderstanding. You see, we're a bit overcrowded here, no room for extras." She paused, letting her words truly settle into the space. I clenched my fists, but kept my composure on the outside. She turned, showcasing her designer dress, perfectly fitted to her body, as if declaring, "This is who matters here." I couldn't help but notice her elegance, but something in her posture, in the way she moved, told me that her confidence was nothing but a mask. She was trying to hide her malice, but it wasn't working. "This place is for people who belong in this world," she continued, her voice becoming more biting. People like me. Beautiful, smart, those who truly deserve attention. Each word cut through me, but I held my ground. With every passing second spent in her company, I could feel a storm brewing inside me. I felt the atmosphere change, my face turning red with shame, my heart racing faster. All this time, Jack sat quietly, his gaze slipping over me but never meeting mine. I couldn't understand what was happening. I felt increasingly like an outsider in this world, a world where Vanessa played on a field where no one was her equal. But I couldn't allow myself to give in, I couldn't just walk away. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, despite every word she had said, despite her overt cruelty. Why was she doing this? Why did she need to control everything that was mine? All I could do was stand directly before her and look her in the eye. "Thank you all for the invitation, but I think I'll pass," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though emotions were churning inside me. I just wanted to drop by and say hello. I looked at the group sitting at the table, their faces frozen for a moment in anticipation. Every word I spoke now sounded to them like an inevitable blow. My face was expressionless, but I could feel my breath becoming shallow. I turned and approached the restaurant manager, ignoring the stares that clung to me like needles. "Please, make sure my husband's friends take care of the bill today, on my account," I added with a slight smile, not allowing myself to look at any of the faces at the table. As I was about to leave, I couldn't help but add, "And Vanessa, there's a lovely diner down the street. I've heard they make amazing hot dogs. You might want to try them sometime." As I spoke those words, I felt something cold and irresistible fill my soul. I didn't know what drove me, anger or the sense that, in that moment, I had finally gained control. I left the restaurant, leaving behind stunned silence and, most likely, a deeply humiliated Vanessa, whose expression told me she hadn't expected such a response. When Jack returned from his business trip a few days later, I couldn't help but share the incident with him. We were having dinner, and I couldn't stop laughing as I remembered what she looked like. "You should have seen her face, Jack," I said, trying to stifle my laughter, but it broke through anyway. "I don't think I've ever seen anyone turn that red." Jack seemed to shake his head in embarrassment, but his eyes sparkled with genuine amusement. He laughed, but there was something unsettling in his laughter, as if he felt a bit uneasy about the whole situation. "I can't believe she thought she could embarrass you," he said, still chuckling. "You handled it too calmly. I wouldn't have had that much confidence." His words sounded like praise, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. It wasn't so much admiration for my strength as his acknowledgement of how strangely things had turned out. He probably still didn't fully realize that everything that had been happening between us and with Vanessa was much more complicated than just high-level games. At some point, we both had become part of this game, even if I didn't always want to. I waved at two distinguished elderly gentlemen in impeccable suits, who were conversing quietly at the other end of the room. They were true aristocrats in their circle, and I always admired their manners, how they expertly manipulated social norms to create an atmosphere of respect and dignity around them. I knew their visit was important. They represented a business Jack had long worked with, and I always felt proud when they appeared at such meetings. As they approached, Vanessa continued her conversation with the people I had no desire to engage with, but I simply ignored her, feeling that this time, her playful behavior could not overshadow me. As usual, she focused on the men, but her manners no longer seemed appealing to me, and I didn't feel the need to join the conversation with her. When the men drew nearer, I smiled widely and, without hesitation, embraced one of them warmly. "Dad, I'm so glad you could make it," I said, kissing him on the cheek and feeling the familiar warmth of his body. He was old, but his presence always gave me confidence. After that, I turned to the other man, extending my hand in greeting. "Mr. Thompson, it's wonderful to see you again," I said, looking into his kind eyes. He shook my hand with the same warmth that always accompanied his gaze. This man was important to me not just as a business partner, but as someone who had supported Jack and me through the toughest of times. I couldn't help but notice how Vanessa was watching everything. Her jaw dropped when she realized who the second man standing next to me was. A nasty spark appeared in her eyes, and, holding back obvious displeasure, she turned toward him. Her voice became sharp with disbelief and barely concealed aggression. "Daddy," she said, unable to hide her shock and outrage, "what are you doing? How can you be friendly with this nobody?" I noticed how her gaze became colder and sharper, and the words she spoke seemed to shoot out like lightning. There was not the slightest hint of respect in her voice, only contempt. "She's just an accountant," Vanessa continued, her voice growing more shrill, "who got lucky and now pretends to be one of us. She doesn't belong here, she's not one of us." I felt her words pierce my chest, but this time, I was ready. Suddenly, it became clear to me that Vanessa still couldn't release me from her veil of manipulation. She couldn't stand the idea that someone might take her place, and all she could do was try to humiliate me in an attempt to reclaim her illusory power. I ignored her words because I knew they were nothing more than empty attempts to diminish me. I looked at her with clear understanding, knowing that her attempts to control me were becoming increasingly laughable. But the most important thing I felt at that moment was the support I received from my father and Mr. Thompson. I wasn't alone. "Vanessa," I said in a calm but determined voice, "it's none of your business how I got here, or who's in my circle. I don't owe you any explanations. You can keep playing your game, but remember this, I'm not someone you can intimidate." Her face drained of color, and she began searching for something to say in reply, but the words got stuck in her throat. I looked again at my father, at Mr. Thompson, at their calm faces, and felt the internal tension slowly fade away. I wouldn't let her game overshadow my life. Vanessa stood alone in the center of the ballroom, her shoulders shaking convulsively from sobs. The mascara was smudged across her cheeks, turning her face into a smeared mask. It was hard for me to watch her, and yet, I felt a strange sense of relief. The crowd around us slowly dispersed, leaving her in solitude, in her humiliation. I felt no sympathy for her, didn't want to approach her, and felt no guilt for what had happened. On the contrary, I felt a surge of strength building inside me. Strength to move forward, without looking back. The evening passed in a haze, and although I barely registered what was happening around me, I was ready to accept whatever fate had in store. When the awards ceremony began, I found myself standing on stage, surrounded by glowing spotlights and the gaze of everyone present. A few days later, when they announced my name in the category of Successful Entrepreneurial Debut, I felt something amazing stir in my chest, pride in myself. I received the award, and in that moment, it seemed like the whole world stopped, as if those few seconds were the most important in my life. When I turned, my eyes met my father's and Jack's in the audience. They both stood in their sharp suits, their faces glowing with pride. Their enthusiasm was contagious. I saw Jack struggling to hold back a smile, while my father, usually reserved, took a step forward, as if nudging me toward this moment. Suddenly, I felt an overwhelming wave of joy and accomplishment. I stood on that stage, and the two most important people in my life were right there with me. It was like an unprecedented recognition, like something I had been striving for all my life. The ceremony continued, but I no longer cared about what was happening around me. That moment, that rise when I felt I was on a pedestal, was more important than anything. Over the following weeks after the awards ceremony, life settled into a new, pleasant rhythm. Everything seemed to fall into place. I had become part of the world I had long wanted to enter. My work, my efforts, had finally been rewarded. I felt my confidence grow stronger with each passing day. The golden statuette found its place on the mantelpiece, a quiet, but proud reminder of that eventful night. Every time I passed by, my gaze would involuntarily stop on that shining object, and I felt pride in my accomplishments welling up inside me once again. Jack and I continued to attend events with his friends and business partners, and each time, I felt our circle expanding, as though I was becoming part of something greater. We kept strolling through the evening streets of the city, laughing and talking, enjoying the calm and warmth of our encounters. Sometimes, it felt like we were two travelers in this world, searching for our way and finding it, with each step becoming more confident and joyful. Life had become simpler, and yet more complex. Now, I had more obligations, more responsibilities, but I didn't feel fear or exhaustion. While Vanessa continued to exist somewhere on the periphery, trying to squeeze herself into my world, I kept moving forward. There was no time for regrets or doubts. A life full of new opportunities lay ahead of me, and I was ready to embrace it, step by step, with each new success and every new connection. Each morning began with confidence, and the evening brought peace. Jack, as always, was by my side, supportive, loving, ready to share both the joys and challenges with me. We were building a future that was exactly as I had imagined it, full of stability and harmony, in which there seemed to be no place for mistakes. But deep down in my heart, I knew that what I had left behind wasn't over. And perhaps all of this was just the beginning of something that was yet to unfold in the future.